welcome everyone. Look forward to hearing from you a bit more, but introducing you to us, Behavioral Essentials, and um, our our work around the book Blindspotting. Yeah. And Catherine, if you want to just quickly, I don't have a formal slide for us because I feel like we're moving through things pretty quickly, but if you want to introduce yourself real quick before we jump in.
Absolutely. Nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. I'm Catherine Grace, Director of Client Success. I was one of the primary authors of the Blind Spotting Report, so I'll, be in a position to speak to some of the science behind it during today's session.
Right on. Thank you. And my name is Arti Chopra, and you'll see a couple of me. And as you see, if you haven't picked up on my name yet, with all of the names of your names changing to mine somehow, I'm the director of coaching. And since we are the official provider of the coaching programs and the assessment, I'll support the coaching programs aspect. Catherine will support more of the understanding of the assessment, and you all will be in good hands. Self-awareness is the catalyst to growth. Now, I know so far we have a little bit quieter of a group. If you're more comfortable putting it in the chat, would love to hear from you. How many of you use an assessment currently with your clients in some shape or form? Feel free to put it in the chat as well if that's, or use DISC. Yep, some level of an assessment. Hogan and DISC. Awesome. Awesome. So self-awareness is the catalyst to growth. This is what we believe, is that when people see themselves clearly, they're going to operate with a level of awareness with all the people, all of their touch points, including their teams, and so when teams discover that, and they operate with a higher level of awareness, they move from that friction to flow. Yeah, so self-awareness for us at Behavioral Essentials, that's us at our core. And what we utilize, what you'll get introduced to shortly, is blind spotting. And we also have our E3 assessment. And that's the entire purpose of it, is to support people in leveling up in their awareness of self and how other people see them as well. All right, because from my coaching experience, and again, feel free to chime in the chat here, but from my coaching experience, oftentimes a company's problems are not related to business strategy, are not related to having good product ideas. It's often comes back to the people problem. So oftentimes the company problems become people problems. And the issue that continues to surface is, what is it that people are not seeing in themselves that are bringing about greater friction, greater miscommunication, conflict, turnover? What's the impact of these things we're not seeing in ourselves, but other people are experiencing, and the trickle down effect of that? This is really also our why. To solve for the miscommunication, to solve for the conflict that people experience and the turnover companies experience, as that becomes difficult not only for the company but for the team themselves, constantly having to restart and training and all the strain that it puts on multiple levels. So this is very much connected with our why. So what we do as a result at Behavioral Essentials, we use the power of awareness to help you hire better and grow your leaders and teams. We believe that when you do so, you'll have people that are happier, perform better, make better decisions, make decisions with more clarity, ultimately growing that bottom line. And hey, it's great if they stay longer too, right? Handling some of that, a lot of the challenges nowadays, especially, that come with turnover. So, and this is where blind spotting comes in as well, is this is in partnership with clinical psychologist and executive coach Martin Dubin. It's a science-backed targeted performance model that helps leaders identify and address their blind spots. There is a book connected with this as well, as you'll see here, published by Harvard Business Review, and we're the official provider of the assessment and coaching programs associated with it. So, in partnership with the assessment and coaching programs, we help leaders uncover their blind spots and also support them in strategizing what to actually do about them. So, rooted in clinical psychology and behavioral science. And we have Catherine here to tell us a little bit more about the science behind the assessment.
So I think it's important to first, why are we going to take the time today to talk a little bit at a high level about the science? Why does it matter? I think as you all maybe have experienced, especially for those of you who use assessment in your coaching work, inevitably someone might push back. And so really kind of being able to help explain the science, being helped to kind of understand the boundaries of what you can and you can't claim based on this assessment or any assessment for that matter, and then confidently address any of that pushback that inevitably comes from somebody, especially if they feel that their results don't fully reflect them or they're having a hard time with what the results are. Then sometimes you might experience that pushback. So we want to make sure you understand what's behind this, and it also allows you to address any of that pushback that might come. So DISC, for instance, is one of the best known trait-based models. So these were sort of the precursor to models like blind spotting, for instance. And what those models did really well was they're really well researched, they're very well established in psychology and organizational development. They're very familiar. There's not too many people where you say DISC and they don't know what you're talking about. And so they're really great for a general understanding of behavioral tendencies. And so the DISC and a lot of other similar assessments are based on those big five trait personality assessments. So the idea of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion. So Hogan, Enneagram, Culture Index are other really recognized, widely used assessments today. I can go to the next slide. And so while there's a lot that's great about those models, what they miss is the context. They just basically say you walk into any situation high in extroversion. Whereas the context is missing, or that nuance is missing in terms of the circumstances in which that person might exhibit high extroversion. So not everyone who's high in extroversion, for instance, is going to thrive or really enjoy being in a public speaking environment. Somebody might love being the center of attention in that way and sort of being a performer or being up on a stage, whereas that might be somebody else's worst nightmare who is showing the same trait on something like the disc. And so that context piece is missing. Go to the next slide. And so while a trait-based model is going to ask, is this person generally agreeable? Is this person generally extroverted, for instance? The blind spotting assessment is going to ask, what are this person's strengths? So it takes into consideration that context, those circumstances or the environment. So it's really going to go beyond that and ask, what not only are this person's strengths, but what does it look like when those strengths start to tip over? And that behavior that has been successful 90% of the time begins to work against them. And that's what really we're looking at when we think about the blind spotting assessment. So the instrument for the output that you've seen, for those of you that took the blind spotting assessment, it's called the adjective checklist. So this was developed back in the 1950s. It is one of the most rigorously researched behavioral instruments in psychology. And all it is, as you saw for those of you who took it, please describe how you behave most of the time. You have 300 adjectives from which to choose. So there's no ratings, there's no abstract statements, there's no, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you behave in this particular circumstance, where eventually we all just sort of go, I don't know, and we just kind of select something in the middle. So it's a lot more straightforward in that way. It's a lot faster, and we tend to not see that kind of fatigue that starts to come from those much sort of longer assessments. And so this format, because of that, works really well. So like we just talked about, you sort of don't get that fatigue. So it reduces that just the work of having to sort of do these yes no judgments or these things on a Likert scale of some sort. So it's a lot faster and you're going to get more consistency as a result. Adjectives themselves are going to describe things that feel more observable, more concrete. So, for instance, dominant and cooperative feel more clear and accessible to a lot of us than I tend to take charge in group settings and then I need to pick where I land on a scale of 1 to 5. Um, there's also reduced self-report bias. So, the idea of what I just said, where you get a little tired and you just kind of start to pick the middle because you're not really sure. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. So there's that tendency, agreeing when I'm not sure and just saying, sure, I'm cooperative, and just picking it because it seems like the right thing to do, or picking words because I want to project, I want to look a certain way. So there are mechanisms in the adjective checklist that help reduce the likelihood of any of those things from happening. And then the output is that you get sort of, you don't really see this in terms of the blind spotting report because it's given to you in a really narrative synthesis, but it gives you this sense of your behavior in the context of the environment. So it's based on something called the need press theory, which just basically says the need being what we come into the environment with, plus the press or the environment, the output is our behavior. And so that's what this assessment allows us to measure. And we're not going to go into the super detailed level of this, but to basically say, so in terms of making it really clear from a credibility standpoint, is reliability, when we talk about reliability, that really is saying, does this assessment produce consistent results? And yes, lots of rigorous research has shown that the adjective checklist establishes consistent results over time. And validity doesn't measure what it says it's going to measure. Yes, there's also quite a bit of established validity in the science as well. So this is a reliable and valid assessment of behavior.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. So
Welcome.
let's align on what a blind spot is in the context that we're talking about it today. Blind spots are what we can't see in ourselves that hold us back as leaders or hold your clients back as leaders, but other people experience, other people see. They can be in the context of blind spotting and this book and the self-awareness model that you'll get introduced to, and it was on your assessment as well. Their behaviors, they could be emotions, intellect, traits, motives, and identities that we embody. How do they come about in the first place? So I'm sure you all have heard the phrase of neurons that fire together, wire together, fire together, wire together. And it's exactly that over and over and over again. So these neural networks strengthen with that repetition. Repeated behavioral patterns then become automatic. Now, automatic patterns, behavioral patterns are not necessarily a bad thing. And that's what we want to convey, make sure we convey as well. It's not a bad thing to have an automatic behavioral pattern, a default behavior you might hear. And the reason being, because this is still strengths based, it's like, hey, likely this does illustrate a great strength of yours. And whether you're considering this for yourself and your own coaching, or you're considering it how clients are impacted, uh, oftentimes those strengths are what brought them to their level of success in the first place. It's what brought you to your level of success in the first place. So it's not so much about having automated behavioral patterns. It's more about when they're left unexamined. That's the key piece here. When they're left unexamined, that's when they become blind spots, and that's when they become an issue. It's just like what was mentioned earlier, it's about context. So behavior is about what we tend to do. Context is about what is the environment asking of that leader, of that person, of you in that moment of time. When it matches well, it's great. It's about when it mismatches. That's what creates friction as a result. And so that's where, the assessment's going to bring about, and as you all reflect on your own reports, it's going to bring about narratives around when this can potentially show up, But the beauty of it is in your gift of coaching that client that support them in getting really into the weeds and the nuances of, all right, this behavior is great, but in what context is it maybe tipping over into a blind spot, becoming a blind spot, and recognizing when that tipping point is, becoming more familiar with those neural networks that are automated and looking to take them apart and rewire them and coming up with new strategies to do so. And again, it's really about that tipping point, which only shows up a small fraction of the time. That's the difference also between this assessment being very clear, concise, and to the point. As you all see, it's not a 30-page report. It's less than 10 oftentimes, and it really gets to the essence of it's not meant to be this comprehensive model. It's meant to be this targeted report that supports the individual in recognizing what's that 5-10% that if I were to become more aware of and practice more awareness around, that would change everything. Yeah. So here's a coach who's speaking to her insights after utilizing the blind spotting assessment. As you can see, and I've even also experienced in some of my ICF training as well, sometimes coaching can be very exploratory. Like it can just be very open-ended, and the client with this a level of importance is placed on the client having their hands on the wheel at all times. And that's helpful. I understand in practice with those standards in that they are really in the driver's seat, and they should be. They should feel the level of empowerment that we want them to feel as their coaches, that they have the ability to drive. But sometimes when it's left to be so open-ended, and this is likely why you all rely on assessments, many of you already, is that it gives some sort of a roadmap, at least to consider, to follow. And that's the same thing as Jenny, a leadership coach, expressed as well, is that it allowed her to go from to get results much quicker versus, it taking multiple sessions over multiple years to being like, okay, in just a couple of weeks, we're going to expedite those learnings, those lessons, and start putting this stuff into action sooner so that the clients get the results faster. I also know in my coaching experience that there is a lot of pressure put on to the coach of, I need to spot and find value in my coaching with you ASAP. And the pressure that gets put on the coach as a result of that. So it may not necessarily be, it's not about competing assessment with assessment. It may be a multitude of them, but utilizing an assessment in the beginning also really expedites that journey of like the client finding value very quickly and being able to walk away with greater understanding of self and know that, hey, my coach seems to really get me, and make that connection really quickly too. So great way to build rapport, and would love to hear as we step away from this shortly to learn more about you and your experience with it, your thoughts around it, and answer any questions. So very basic introduction into the blind spotting self-awareness model. Of course, much more about this is in the book itself. And you'll notice that depending on how many blind spots you have, you're going to get introduced to it in your assessment as well. Everything but identity is measured in the assessment. You'll see some static text that will give you ideas on how you can connect with identity on a personal level or support a client in doing that. But it's a lot more discussion based. Like it's very personal, excuse me. Identities are the labels that we wear, right? And if you're supporting a client they might have CMOs, CEO, manager, supervisor, they might be wearing those professional level titles. It might also include personal titles as well. It might be mom, friend, sister, whatever it may be. So that's what identity is referring to, those labels, those name tags that we wear. You'll see that it's also connected or touches directly behavior. Behavior is measured in the assessment. You'll see as you go more inward into the model, intellect, emotion, traits. So, different ways in that we process information, different ways in which we feel, traits, which is oftentimes those stable aspects of our personality over time. The innermost one being motive, which are our drivers. What drives us? What motivates us? And as you go more into the sphere, know that it tends to run deeper. Sparking change on motive, for example, you can bring about awareness to it. And it's likely a good thing because oftentimes it's most unconscious to us. But that's a deep driver that's likely not necessarily going anywhere. Where, as a coach, even though you can start from anywhere when you're supporting a client in reviewing this, because it's more about what they connected to, it's easiest to bring to conscious awareness, to bring to light how an identity shift or greater understanding of identity might support them. A behavioral shift, it's much easier and more in that person's awareness to make changes around them versus motive. So that should give you a sense of how there is an interconnectedness between all of them. But of course, the book dives into it much, much deeper. So it looks like many of you got the chance to take the assessment already, and you got the link earlier, so no worries on that. Here's a couple of other things that we do in connection to blind spotting. So we have certifications, we have a keynote experience, support with onboarding, ongoing team development, leadership development, and experiences around that. And you all already got that link there. So now that we've covered all that we've covered about the science, introducing the self-awareness model, how it might support coaching, now we can just sit with it together, hoping that you all maybe have some questions or even some comments about what your experience was like. I love seeing it in the chat that it's been a very positive feel to it so far, but around just loving the simplicity of it. I appreciate that. But what do you all think? And just want to open it up to you all, and we can absolutely talk about results and talk about assessment reports and answer any questions that you have. So for those of you not on camera but are able to join, please feel free to. We'd love to see your faces. But if for whatever reason you can't, you can also use the chat and answer and ask, excuse me, any questions that you might have. Any questions about results and stuff are totally valid as well.
I'm back. I'm kind of just going through my results and trying to pick something. Let's see. And overall, it really fit. It was like, yep, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Arti, quick question.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you spoke about how motive being the core element, right? I mean, maybe not the right word, but something that's really compared to identity or behavior or intellect or emotion, right? Could you
Mhm.
just explain a little bit more about like how is that layering done, right? Like what is the idea behind those layers, as well as I know the identity part is not covered as part of the assessment, but the behavior is being shown. So from an outer layer point of view, let's say if a client is looking at this and behavior, there is a blind spot. Whereas when it comes to motive, maybe there is not a blind spot, right? So how do they kind of take that as a result as well? So just want to understand the relationship between those three layers. I think
Yeah.
that will be my first question. And yeah, then I have another question to add to it depending on your response. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Catherine, this is making me think about potentially using that example report when you would talk about how some things are an imbalance, some things are a gap, and that might support with some of those connections too.
Well, the other piece too is the way that Marty talks about the self-awareness model in the book is that it's also what is furthest out is most it's easiest for us to bring it into our awareness and to possibly do something about it. So it's very easy, relatively speaking, for us to make an adjustment to our behavior or to shift maybe the label that we use when we describe ourselves. Whereas that deepest innermost layer of motive is going to be sort of most hidden from conscious awareness. It's going to take a lot more work to uncover it, to understand it, and if anything at all, to do anything about it. The other piece is that everything, whether it's emotion, intellect, motive, also shows up in those outer layers. So a lot of blind spots in those other areas might show up in some way in our behavior. And so a lot of times that's why it's probably what you're going to address first, or at least talk about first, in terms of if you suspect maybe there's a motive blind spot, some of your conversations might start at the outermost layer about how might this be showing up in how we behave, in how we show up in a particular environment. And then to Arthi's question there, Marty also talks about each of these blind spot areas as what you're looking for instance, in intellect is overuse. So, for instance, if your report showed that you're very high on horsepower, and that you're at risk of it becoming a blind spot. The risk is overuse, relying on it. So, sort of the idea that a lot of our behaviors, these are strengths, they've brought us success, 95% of the time. But there are those instances where we keep going back to the default, we keep going back to what's brought us success. But then there's times where maybe that doesn't really work in our favor. And it becomes a blind spot because we keep going back to it, we keep defaulting to it. And then sometimes going harder, even though it's not working. And so it's those few instances where it tips over because we're relying on it too much. And so, in the case of motive, in the case of trait, behavior, and intellect, it's all about sort of over reliance. Whereas in emotion, and we might be talking about it more in the sense of a gap, where maybe sort of our emotional awareness, there's a gap in it, and that's where the work is. So hopefully that answers your
Yeah.
questions.
Thank you, Catherine. And I'd like to, and I see in the chat as well, I think it might be helpful to see how this might more practically and tactically, as mentioned in the chat, uh, show itself and how a coach could support a client in becoming more aware of it and what to do about it. So I'd like to give a couple of examples of real life examples of how it's been utilized in coaching, and you'll see the interconnectedness of all the layers in it as well. So let's say someone has an identity of, one of the labels they proudly wear is subject matter expert. They love to know their stuff. And mind you, identity being a very personal conversation, that's more of what a coach has to listen or and hear of or pick up on, excuse me, even as the person's introducing themselves. And whether it's your first session and you're just getting to know them and you're just building rapport, or you've had several sessions and you're just introducing it maybe later in their coaching path. But what have you noticed even about what that person, how they self-identify? And it's oftentimes the first things that they say about themselves. But let's say they're just really driven and they even talk about it of like, I love to know my stuff. And I love that the team can rely on me to know my stuff. Now, identity is powerful because let's say, yes, that person is heavily, and you can tell in their language and energy and everything, they're just very immersed in that subject matter expert identity. But why they've likely come to you as well is because they're experiencing a transition. They just went from subject matter expert to now they are a manager of that team or a leader of that team, of a particular team. So they have gotten some level of promotion, some shift they're experiencing. The behaviors that would link to the identity of subject matter expert, of their roles in meetings, for example, how often they speak up, how much space that they take. Now you're already seeing identity and behavior connected. Supporting the client in recognizing, well, now you're associating all those behaviors with that one particular identity, but your identity has shifted. And what's causing friction in your world right now is that you're noticing you are still behaving as subject matter expert. What does a leader of this team, well, how would you identify behaviors that a leader needs to exhibit instead? So it's about surfacing awareness around like, oh, and supporting that client in those breakthroughs of, I'm still clinging to a previous identity and I'm behaving as such. What I need to do is embrace a new identity and the behaviors associated with that. Identity is really, really powerful, as you can tell, because there's also an acknowledgement of some level of letting go and grief and loss that might come with that. They may have been in that position X number of years, and now all of a sudden, their immediate peers are now part of a team that they're meant to supervise. They now have to identify new behaviors and embrace new behaviors that a leader would embrace, a leader of that team. They've got to focus on empowering others, take up less space, and empower others to take more, for example. And then just as the other layers that Catherine touched on, you can have, for example, like I even have this, my motive blind spot is achievement. I really like to get stuff done. I really like to do things and feel like I'm making progress. That's a core value of mine, a core driver of mine. Recognizing, all right, what are the symptoms and signs as I move outward in that sphere? What are ways in which it shows up? It's connected to an emotion blind spot, for example, for me, of not having awareness around personal emotions. The behavior then shows up a different way. So, for example, I wear a lot of hats in a lot of roles, but achievement at my core, it might show up something as simple as sending an email to my team way too late at night. Okay. So for me, I might just be trying to catch up. I have a small child. So when he comes home from school, a behavior I've had to shift is closing laptop, being in mom mode for the evening. And then naturally, when he goes to sleep, I'm going to start catching up on emails and stuff, because that is how the achievement blind spot shows itself. Those are behaviors linked to that blind spot. Now, recognizing, well, when is that a great thing, Arti, that you're catching up? Good for you. You're catching up on your emails and you're keeping up with things. What's that downstream impact for your team? Getting those notifications. I mean, I encourage them to turn off notifications, but what is the impact of them on the receiving end? So, and then lack of awareness around personal emotions. And yeah, the team that's on here knows this pretty well, but me recognizing that I'm wired for burnout, and I've got to mind the signs and symptoms of that as well. So hopefully, Nat, that supports you in recognizing, like, okay, you can really start from anywhere. As a coach supporting a client, it's great to be able to gravitate towards what they, for whatever reason, connected with and start from there. But knowing that, hey, that achievement blind spot is not likely going anywhere. It's just about operating with greater awareness around it and giving it more life of how this is practically actually show up when is it a great thing and when is it tipping over into that 5-10% of slowing or lessening my effectiveness in whatever way, whether it be building relationships, whether it be, you think you're catching up and you're working well, but your emails aren't making that much sense that time of night, whatever it may be. But hopefully that supports you in seeing the links and how just connecting with what was mentioned in the chat, how it might be used more practically, tactically with the client. I'll pause. I know you mentioned you had another question, but opening up to any other insights or comments around what we just shared.
Thanks, Arti, and thanks, Catherine. I think that makes sense with respect to the connection. So when it comes to these aspects, right, the different aspects, I see a definition in my report. I'm not sure if that definition is a personalized definition for each aspect or if it's a constant one in all across all reports. Where motive, it says that it is indicated by a high score, whereas when it comes to emotion, it says it is indicated by a low score, and when it comes to behavior, it says it is indicated by a high or low score, right? So I understand a certain high score can become a blind spot because you are relying on it again and again, and kind of that's your go-to behavior or go-to habit or trait. But can you just explain a little bit more about, like, is it dependent on the high score and low score, or for every single aspect, even a low score could be a blind spot as well, right?
Yeah, Catherine, do you
Am I right
mind
in understanding
shedding
that?
some more light on that, on the scoring and how that connects with blind spots that show up?
Yeah, so when we built the report, we wanted to really make sure that we were closely in alignment with Marty's self-awareness model. And he builds it very much so and talks a lot about strengths overused. And so we had a lot of internal conversations, sort of just making some decisions about whether it was going to be high and low. And we decided, and thank you for pointing that out in behavior, because we originally had high and low and actually um, made a change. But thank you for pointing that out, because that's something that's in the narrative that should be removed because it's really just high. Um, so it was just sort of some philosophical conversations that we made to keep everything in line with and reflect to the best of our ability the self-awareness model. And so, in theory, yes, low could be a blind spot. But again, we felt that sort of drifted too far from the intention behind Marty's model. And again, this is supposed to be in close alignment with the book. And so those were why those choices were made.
Okay, got it.
Thank you for your questions.
Mhm.
Very good.
I see, Marta, you said you had an unexpected blind spot. Is that something you're willing to share a little bit more about?
Yeah, sure. I'm not currently working as a coach as much as I would like to, but I sort of thought that I didn't have um, that I had managed, like my need to stay in touch with a client or to stay on top of what they were, whether they were doing, whether they were carrying out their action plan or not. And I thought, okay, the session's over, or the whole pack of sessions are over, and then um, the client is responsible for his actions, right? So carry out his action plan, stick with it, and so on. And then it sort of occurred to me, what about my personal life? And I have three daughters, and it's like, okay, so I guess I carry the mentoring. So I'm supposed to let go, and I pride myself that I let my girls, the youngest one is 18, so I mean they don't need me anymore, like to be on top of them all the time. And I've been thinking about some examples that I'm really not doing that, right? So it collides a little bit with my identity as
Mhm.
mom. right? But also with my identity, so, I mean, my values as a mom is not to be like a helicopter mom. I want them to go out in the world and have their own experiences and make their mistakes. But I guess I'm still, like, oh, the youngest one has an exam at university. Is she waking up on time? And I'm like, did the alarm go off? I didn't hear it. Oh my God, she's going to be late. What do I do? Do I go in? Do I not go in? So I guess I have a blind spot there. I think I'm doing, like the relaxed mom and trusting, and we'll put the measures when once the problem's here, no big deal. And then I'm inside, oh my God, is she going to make it? So that was something that sort of was in my radar, but I wasn't aware of it. So now I can, go and think, yeah, not my problem. She's old enough. I'll be here when, in the aftermath, but
That's right. Right. That is such a good example. Thank you for sharing. This is how, and I remember, Catherine, we talked about this when we were first introduced to some of these, introduced to and reading the book way back around identity and connecting with it. This was one that really struck a chord with me. And the identity that I was playing with at the time, like, is mom, was and is. And one of the biggest things in it, so when you all talk to, if it resonated with you personally, imagine the ahas that your clients can have around those. That's all it took. And then, yes, got into the assessment and I got to dig and have like so much more depth to it. But the identity that really struck me, that there is, Marta, your example was great because it highlighted a couple of things. It's highlighted the aha, like, oh, that moment of, wait a second, I'm now seeing something in myself that I wasn't seeing before. And then this reflection on, what identity do I want to embrace now? What identity do I need to embrace now? And this sort of like back and forth that happens with it, because there's a little bit of grief and loss that comes with certain aspects, as well as just the dynamics of being a parent and seeing your child grow. Like for me, it was very, very short example of I travel with some frequency for behavioral essentials, and I have a 5-year-old at the moment. So when I leave, I really need to be able to take off that label of primary parent in charge, and I need to put it on my partner and put it on my husband and be like, it's all you. You got this. But what I was doing was still trying to, the same things you were describing, Marta. Are they eating? Did he eat? Is he picking him up on time? Does he have
managing
homework
from the
today?
distance.
Managing from a distance. As a result, this is where it links to behavior. What am I not doing well? Where is my energy not going that it needs to be going? And just considering other aspects of the output as well. So just even that shift of, nope, I'm visiting a client or doing whatever coaching for a purpose, for a reason, and I need to be more present in that space, and I need to let go of that, even if it's a temporary let go. And yes, I like take that label right back when I land, but it's just, it shifted the way, and it shifts away what I've noticed in clients, and even as how you described, of the impact, the output of the choices that we make and the ways that we behave as a result. And it sparks a level of curiosity around, maybe I should do something different this time. Yeah, thank you. That was a great example. Wonderful. Well, we have a couple of minutes left. And I noticed a few of you have had to drop off early, but it's perfectly fine, and appreciate you connecting with us. Just before you head out, if you have any questions, by all means, come off of mute, or you can also put your questions in the chat. We're still here. But for those who might have to drop off or have a session of any kind at the top of the hour, just want to invite you to stay connected with us here. Whether it is, oh, and I apologize, it kicks me out sometimes. whether it is just more directly with Catherine or myself. You can email Catherine at Behavioral Essentials or myself at Arti at Behavioral Essentials. Or if you're just more curious about what is this blind spotting thing, behavioral essentials thing, and how can I learn more, we do have our coaching programs around it, the assessment, and you can share that with others as well. And there's a type of report you can take for free. For those of you, you should be getting the full report, but there's still another type that you can take on the site itself that you can share. And then we have certification programs in progress as well. So there might be a cohort that fits for you. Thank you all so much for joining. Just checking the chat here. And yeah, I think we are in a good spot to wrap up. But appreciate you all, appreciate your participation, your sharing, your questions, and your time this morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining.